The transport shuttle descended through the clouds of New Geneva, breaking atmosphere with a gentle shudder that barely registered in the passenger cabin. Marcus Webb sat in the back row, his dark hands folded across his lap, watching the planet below grow larger in the viewport. At 72 years old, he had made this kind of journey more times than he could count, but this one felt different. This time he was not arriving as a soldier or a commander. He was arriving as a teacher. The orbital combat training facility hung in space above the planet like a massive steel flower, its petals extending outward in perfect symmetry. Each section housed warriors from different species across the Galactic Council. Humanity had been part of the Council for 30 years now, but Marcus knew the truth that most humans tried to ignore. They were still seen as the newcomers, the weak ones, the species that had barely crawled out of their own solar system before stumbling into a galaxy full of beings far more powerful than themselves. The shuttle docked with a metallic clang, and Marcus gathered a single bag. Inside were his clothes, his personal items, and one pair of old boxing gloves that had been with him since he was 17 years old. The leather was cracked and faded, the padding worn thin from decades of use, but he would not leave them behind. They were a reminder of where he came from and what he knew. The airlock opened and Marcus stepped into the facility. The corridor stretched before him, gleaming and sterile, filled with beings that made him look small and fragile by comparison. A group of Crithian warriors passed by, their scaled bodies towering over him by at least 2 feet. They moved with the confidence of apex predators, their yellow eyes dismissing him with a single glance. Behind them came a squad of Vex soldiers, their insectoid bodies clicking and chittering as they marched in perfect formation. Their compound eyes swiveled to look at him, and Marcus could feel their amusement even without words. He made his way to the central assembly hall, following the signs in a dozen different languages. The room was enormous, designed to accommodate hundreds of trainees from across the galaxy. Marcus found a spot near the back and stood quietly, his hands clasped behind his back in a posture that had become second nature during his 40 years in the military. The hall filled quickly. Warriors of every description filed in, their armor and weapons creating a symphony of alien sounds. Marcus spotted the other humans in the crowd easily enough. There were maybe 20 of them, scattered throughout the room trying to look confident and failing. They were young, fit, trained in the latest combat techniques that Earth had developed. They wore their uniforms with pride, but Marcus could see the uncertainty in their eyes. They knew what everyone else knew. In a room full of beings who could tear through steel with their bare claws, humanity was outmatched. A massive figure stepped onto the raised platform at the front of the hall. Combat Master Vrex was a Crithian veteran whose body bore the scars of 200 years of warfare. His scales were darker than the others of his kind, and a long scar ran from his left eye down to his jaw. When he spoke, his voice rumbled through the hall like thunder. "Warriors of the Galactic Council," Vrex began, his eyes sweeping across the assembled crowd. "You have been selected to train at this facility because you represent the finest combatants your species has to offer. For the next year, you will learn from each other, compete against each other, and prove yourselves worthy of defending the Council against any threat." Vrex continued his speech, outlining the training schedule and the various competitions that would take place. Marcus listened with half his attention, more interested in observing the other trainees. He watched how they stood, how they moved, how they reacted to Vrex's words. The Crithians stood with their chests out, confident and proud. The Vex remained perfectly still, their discipline absolute. The Zenthari, a species of tall humanoids with silver skin, watched everything with analytical expressions. And the humans shifted their weight nervously, trying to project a confidence they did not feel. "And now," Vrex said, his tone changing to something that might have been amusement, "I will address a peculiar situation that has come to my attention." His yellow eyes found Marcus in the crowd. "Humanity has sent us a new instructor. Commander Marcus Webb, please step forward." Marcus felt every eye in the room turn toward him. He walked down the aisle between the assembled warriors, his steps slow and measured. His gray hair caught the light from above, and his weathered face showed every one of his 72 years. When he reached the front of the hall and turned to face the crowd, he heard the first sounds of laughter. It started with the Crithians, a deep, rumbling sound that seemed to shake the floor. The Vex joined in with their clicking mandibles, a sound like breaking glass. Even some of the Zenthari allowed themselves small smiles. The humans in the crowd looked away in embarrassment. Rex looked down at Marcus from the platform, his scarred face twisted in what might have been a smile. "Commander Webb," he said, his voice carrying easily across the now noisy hall. "Perhaps you can explain to us why Earth has chosen to send someone of your advanced age to a facility designed for warriors in their physical prime." Marcus stood quietly, letting the laughter wash over him. He had expected this. He had known from the moment he accepted the assignment that this would be the reception waiting for him. The galaxy saw humans as weak, and an elderly human was weaker still. In their eyes he was a joke, a curiosity, a mistake. "I am here," Marcus said, his voice calm and clear despite not being enhanced by the platform's speakers. "To teach boxing." The laughter grew louder. Boxing was known throughout the galaxy as a primitive Earth martial art, something humans had practiced centuries ago before developing modern combat techniques. The idea that anyone would waste time learning such an obsolete skill was absurd. Rex shook his head slowly. "Boxing," he repeated as if tasting the word and finding it unpleasant. "A fighting style that prohibits the use of natural weapons, limits strikes to certain areas, and requires both participants to follow arbitrary rules. Tell me, Commander, what possible use could such a limited discipline have in training warriors who will face enemies with claws, fangs, and armor?" Marcus met Rex's eyes steadily. "That," he said simply, "is what I'm here to teach." The laughter continued as Marcus returned to his place in the crowd. He did not mind. He had spent his entire life being underestimated, and it had served him well. Let them laugh now. They would understand soon enough. The assembly ended and the warriors dispersed to their assigned quarters. Marcus collected his bag and made his way through the corridors, following the directions to the human section of the facility. Along the way, he passed training rooms where aliens sparred with each other, their movements blindingly fast and impossibly powerful. He saw a Crethian lift a weight that would have crushed a human flat. He watched a Vex complete an obstacle course in seconds, moving across walls and ceiling with equal ease. His quarters were small but functional. A bed, a desk, a small bathroom. Everything he needed and nothing more. Marcus unpacked his bag, hanging his clothes and placing his boxing gloves on the desk where he could see them. Then he sat on the bed and allowed himself a small smile. Let them laugh, he thought again. The old ways had survived for a reason, and soon everyone in this facility would understand why. The first official training session began at dawn, though dawn in an orbital facility meant nothing more than the artificial lights brightening along the corridors. Marcus arrived at the main training hall early, wearing simple gray workout clothes that had seen better days. The hall was massive, with sections devoted to different types of combat training. Holographic projectors lined the walls, ready to generate any environment or opponent needed for simulation. Marcus found a small corner space and began setting up his area. He brought no advanced equipment, no computers, no holographic systems, just a heavy bag that he had requested from supply, a speed bag hanging from a simple frame, and a marked square on the floor to serve as a ring. It looked pathetically primitive compared to the high-tech training equipment that surrounded it. The other trainees began arriving, and Marcus watched them assemble. The humans gathered in their own group, looking uncertain. Among them were Lieutenant Jake Morrison, a muscular young officer with short brown hair and the build of someone who spent every free moment in the gym, and Captain Kate Barnes, a sharp-eyed woman with red hair pulled back in a tight braid. They had both been top of their class in Earth's military academy, trained in advanced combat systems and zero-gravity warfare. Rex entered the hall last, his heavy footsteps announcing his presence. He moved to the center of the room and called for attention. The hall fell silent immediately, hundreds of warriors from dozens of species turning to face him. "Today begins your true training," Rex announced. "You will be divided into groups based on your species and skill level. Each group will work with combat systems appropriate to your physiology and capabilities." His eyes swept across the room. "We will begin with a demonstration of proper technique. I need a volunteer from the Crithian contingent." A young Crithian stepped forward. His name was Thorak, and even among his own kind he was impressive. He stood 7 feet tall, his scales a deep green color that seemed to shimmer under the lights. His arms were thick with muscle, and his claws gleamed sharp and deadly. "Excellent," Rex said. "Thorak will demonstrate standard Crithian combat forms. Watch carefully and note the efficiency of movement. the application of natural advantages, and the integration of strength with technique. Thorak moved to an open space and began his demonstration. His movements were indeed impressive, combining speed and power in ways that seemed impossible for something so large. He struck holographic targets that appeared around him, each blow landing with devastating force. When he finished, the hall erupted in approving sounds from the various species. Vrex nodded. "This is the standard we expect from all warriors." He paused, then added almost casually, "Now I believe we should see what Earth's representative has to offer. Commander Webb, would you care to demonstrate your boxing technique?" Marcus had been expecting this. It was an obvious setup, a way to humiliate humanity by showing how primitive and ineffective their methods were compared to modern combat forms. He stood slowly and walked to the center of the hall, feeling the weight of hundreds of eyes upon him. "I will need a volunteer," Marcus said quietly. Jake Morrison stepped forward quickly, perhaps hoping to make this less embarrassing for everyone. He was young, strong, and trained in hand-to-hand combat. Against an elderly instructor, he should be able to make things look at least somewhat competent. Marcus and Jake faced each other in the marked square he had set up. Marcus raised his hands in a traditional boxing stance, his left foot forward, his fists near his face. Jake mirrored the position awkwardly, not quite sure how to hold himself. "Boxing has rules," Marcus explained to the watching crowd. "No strikes below the belt, no grabbing or wrestling. Only the fists may be used. These limitations might seem foolish to you, but they serve a purpose. They force the fighter to perfect the fundamental elements of combat." He began moving slowly around Jake, his feet sliding across the floor in a practiced rhythm. "Balance," he said, demonstrating the footwork. "Every movement begins and ends with proper balance. Without it, no amount of strength matters." Jake threw a punch, trying to follow Marcus's movements. It was powerful but telegraphed, the kind of punch that worked in practice but would never land on a real opponent. Marcus slipped to the side, letting the fist pass by his head with inches to spare. "Timing," Marcus continued, still moving. "Power without timing is wasted energy. Speed without timing is just flailing." He tapped Jake lightly on the shoulder, then the ribs, then the chin. None of the strikes had any force behind them, but they illustrated the point. Jake could not touch him, while Marcus could hit him whenever he chose. The hall was quiet now, the initial mockery fading into confused attention. Vrex watched with narrowed eyes, trying to understand what he was seeing. Marcus stepped back and lowered his hands. "That is boxing," he said simply. "Not impressive to look at, not flashy, but effective when properly applied." "Interesting," Vrex said, his tone making it clear he found it anything but. "However, I notice you did not actually strike your opponent with any force. Perhaps a more realistic demonstration is needed." He gestured to Thorak. "Would you be willing to spar with the commander?" The hall went completely silent. Everyone understood what this meant. Thorak was not just a trainee. He was the Crithian champion, a fighter who had won countless battles. Putting him against an elderly human was not a demonstration. It was an execution. Marcus looked at Thorak, then at Vrex, then back at Thorak. He could refuse. Everyone would understand. The mismatch was too great, the risk too high. But if he refused, his credibility as an instructor would be destroyed before it even began. "I accept," Marcus said quietly. Thorak stepped into the marked square, his massive form making Marcus look tiny by comparison. The Crethian's claws extended slightly, his yellow eyes focused and alert. This was a predator facing prey, and everyone in the hall knew how this would end. "Standard sparring rules," Vrex announced. "First to yield or first to be unable to continue, begin." Thorak moved forward slowly, his confidence absolute. He did not rush. There was no need. Marcus stood his ground, his hands raised, his feet planted. He looked like an old man trying to face down a mountain. Thorak struck, his right hand flashing out in a blow that could shatter concrete. Marcus moved at the last possible moment, his head slipping to the side by mere inches. The clawed hand passed through empty air where his face had been. The Crithian grunted in surprise and struck again, this time with his left. Again Marcus moved, his body swaying like a reed in the wind. The blow missed. Thorak's confidence turned to frustration. He began striking faster. Combinations of blows that should have been impossible to avoid. But Marcus avoided them all, his movements minimal and precise. He did not try to block or counter. He simply was not where the strikes landed. After a minute of this, Thorax stepped back, breathing harder than he expected. How was this human avoiding him? The old man was not faster. He was not stronger. But somehow he knew where every strike would land before it was thrown. Marcus had still not thrown a single punch. He simply stood there, hands raised, waiting. The hall watched in stunned silence. Rex called an end to the demonstration before it could continue. "Enough," he said sharply. "That was enlightening, Commander Webb. You have shown us that boxing teaches evasion. A useful skill to be sure, but hardly applicable to real combat." Marcus turned to face Rex. "I have shown you," he said calmly, "that an old man can avoid being hit by your champion. That is the first lesson. There will be others." He walked back to his corner of the hall, leaving Thorax standing in the ring looking confused and frustrated. The other humans watched Marcus with new eyes, seeing something they had not noticed before, and throughout the hall, warriors from a dozen species began to wonder if perhaps they had missed something important. 3 weeks passed, and the facility settled into its training routine. Each morning, the warriors gathered in their species groups and worked through exercises designed to enhance their natural combat abilities. The Crithians practiced with weapons that would have killed a human just from the weight. The Vex ran through coordination drills that looked like elaborate dances. The Xanthari studied tactical projections and war game scenarios that stretched across multiple star systems. And in his small corner of the training hall, Marcus Webb taught boxing to whoever would listen. At first, only Jake Morrison and Kate Barnes attended his sessions, more out of obligation than genuine interest. They were Earth's representatives, and it would look bad if they completely ignored their own instructor. But as the days went by, a few more humans started showing up. Not many, but enough to fill the small space Marcus had claimed. Marcus taught them the basics with patient repetition. How to stand, how to move, how to throw a jab without telegraphing it, how to slip a punch using minimal movement, how to generate power from the legs and hips rather than just the arms. The lessons were simple, almost boring in their simplicity, and most of the humans struggled to see the point. "Commander," Kate said one afternoon after a particularly frustrating session, "with all respect, how is any of this supposed to help us? We have neural combat training that can teach us 1,000 fighting styles in a week. We have weapons that can target enemies from orbit. Why are we spending time learning to punch things?" Marcus was wrapping his hands in the old cloth strips he preferred over modern synthetic gloves. He finished securing the wrap before answering. "Captain Barnes," he said, "what did the neural training teach you about fighting someone stronger than you?" Kate thought for a moment. "Avoid direct confrontation. Use superior positioning and weapons. And if you have no weapons, if positioning does not matter because your opponent is faster than you." "What then?" Kate did not have an answer. Marcus held up his wrapped hands. "Every technology can fail. Every weapon can be taken away. But this," he tapped his head. "And this," he touched his chest over his heart. "These cannot be taken. Boxing is not about the punches. It is about learning to think while someone is trying to hurt you. It is about staying calm when everything in your body is screaming at you to panic. Those lessons work whether you are in a ring on a battlefield or in a starship that is falling apart around you." Jake had been listening from where he sat against the wall. "The commander has a point," he said. "Remember that simulation last week? The one where we had to board a hostile vessel with limited equipment?" Kate nodded. The humans had performed poorly in that exercise, freezing up when faced with the Crithian defenders. Most had been eliminated within seconds. "We have all the training in the world," Jake continued. "But when things got real, when it was just us and them in close quarters, we fell apart. Maybe that is what he is trying to teach us, how not to fall apart." Marcus said nothing, but he gave Jake a slight nod of approval before returning to the heavy bag. His fists struck the bag in a steady rhythm, left, right, the sound echoing through the hall like a heartbeat. Meanwhile, the rest of the facility moved forward with its own programs. The alien species continued to dominate every exercise and competition. During strength assessments, the Crithians lifted weights that humans could not even move. During speed trials, the Vex completed courses so quickly that the timers barely registered their passage. During tactical exercises, the Xanthari won every scenario through superior strategic thinking. Humanity's representatives finished last in everything. When rankings were posted each week, Earth's name sat at the bottom of every category. The other species did not even bother mocking anymore. The humans were simply accepted as being inferior, a fact as obvious and unchangeable as gravity. Vrex used these results to reinforce his lectures about the hierarchy of strength in the galaxy. Power, he would say during his addresses to the assembled trainees, is not distributed equally. Some species evolved on harsh worlds where only the strongest survived. Others developed on paradise planets where intelligence was more valuable than strength. Humans evolved somewhere in the middle, which means they excel at nothing in particular. They are average in every way, and average is not enough at this level. The human trainees heard these words every week, and every week it became harder to disagree. The evidence was right there on the scoreboards, in the rankings, in every competition they lost. No amount of training seemed to make a difference. Then came the incident that changed everything, or at least began to change things. It was a routine sparring session between species groups. The exercise was meant to give warriors experience fighting opponents with different physiologies and combat styles. Jake was matched against Thorak, the same Crithian who had failed to hit Marcus weeks earlier. But Jake was not Marcus. He was young, strong, and trained in modern combat techniques. But he had none of the old man's experience or patience. The match began, and Jake attacked aggressively, trying to use speed and technique to overcome Thorak's size advantage. For a few moments it looked like it might work. Jake landed several good strikes, and the watching humans started to hope that maybe, just maybe, they could compete after all. Then Thorak adjusted his strategy. He stopped trying to match Jake's speed and instead simply waited for an opening. When Jake overextended on a combination, Thorak struck once, a backhanded blow that caught the human lieutenant across the chest. The force of the impact lifted Jake off his feet and sent him crashing into the wall 10 feet away. He slid to the floor and did not move. Medical personnel rushed forward immediately. The humans in the crowd stood in shocked silence. The aliens barely reacted. This was normal to them, just another demonstration of the natural order. Jake was carried to the medical bay with 3 broken ribs, a fractured collarbone, and a concussion. He would recover, the doctors said, but he would be out of training for at least 2 months. Kate found Marcus in his corner of the training hall that evening. The old man was alone, slowly working through combinations on the speed bag, the rhythmic sound filling the empty space. She watched him for a moment before speaking. "You could have stopped it," she said, her voice tight with anger. "You were there. You saw what was happening. Why did you just stand there and let Jake get hurt?" Marcus continued hitting the bag, his focus absolute. Left, right, the pattern never varied. "Commander," Kate said more forcefully, "I am talking to you." Marcus stopped and turned to face her. His dark eyes were calm, showing no emotion. "Captain Barnes, what would you have had me do? Step into a sanctioned sparring match and interfere? That would have accomplished nothing except making Lieutenant Morrison look weak in front of everyone. So you let him get destroyed instead? I let him learn a lesson that he needed to learn. You all need to learn it." Marcus picked up a towel and wiped the sweat from his face. "You think you are ready to fight because you have training and technology. But you are not ready. You do not understand what real fighting is. And you do." Kate's voice was sharp with sarcasm. "Yes," Marcus said simply. "I do. I have been fighting my entire life. Not in simulations. Not in controlled exercises, in places where losing meant dying. I know what it means to face someone stronger, faster, and better equipped than me. I know what it takes to survive anyway." He gestured to the marked square on the floor, his improvised boxing ring. "This is what I am trying to teach you. But none of you want to listen. You think it is primitive, old-fashioned, useless. So you keep doing things your way and you keep losing." Kate opened her mouth to argue, then closed it again. She wanted to be angry, but she could not deny that he was right. The humans were losing. They had been losing since the day they arrived, and nothing they tried seemed to make any difference. Marcus saw the defeat in her expression, and his voice softened slightly. "Captain, you and Lieutenant Morrison are good soldiers. You have potential, but you are trying to beat the aliens at their own game, and that is a game you cannot win. A Crithian will always be stronger than you. A Vex will always be faster. You need to fight differently. You need to fight smarter. And boxing teaches us that," Kate said, still skeptical but no longer angry. "Boxing teaches you how to lose," Marcus said. "That is the secret nobody wants to hear. You are going to get hit. You are going to take damage. The question is whether you can stay focused and functional while it happens. Whether you can wait for your moment instead of panicking. That is what separates a fighter from someone who just knows how to throw punches." He returned to the speed bag, signaling that the conversation was over. Kate stood there for another moment, watching the old man work. Then she turned and left, her mind full of thoughts she had not had before. Over the following weeks, more humans started attending Marcus's sessions. Word had spread about what he had said to Kate, and curiosity brought people who had previously ignored him. The sessions remained simple and unglamorous. Footwork drills, defensive movements, learning to read an opponent's body language. Nothing flashy, nothing that would impress the aliens watching from their own training areas. But slowly something began to change in the humans who trained with Marcus. Jake Morrison returned to training after 6 weeks of recovery. His body healed, but his confidence shaken. The first morning back, he found Marcus in the usual corner, methodically working the heavy bag with combinations that had not changed in 200 years. Jake watched for a while before approaching. "Commander," he said quietly, "I would like to join your sessions, if you will have me." Marcus stopped mid-combination and turned. He studied Jake's face for a long moment, seeing something there that had not been present before. The young lieutenant's cockiness was gone, replaced by a more genuine desire to learn. "Why?" Marcus asked simply. "Because you were right," Jake said. "I thought I could fight Thorak using what I learned in Academy. I thought speed and technique would be enough. But the moment he hit me, everything I knew just disappeared. I panicked, and that is why I lost." Marcus nodded slowly. "Pain has a way of teaching lessons that words cannot. Yes, you can join, but you will start from the beginning like everyone else. No shortcuts because you are an officer." "I understand," Jake said. From that day forward, Jake became one of Marcus's most dedicated students. He arrived early and stayed late, working through the basic drills with a focus he had never shown before. Kate watched the change in him and found herself paying more attention to Marcus's teaching as well. What had seemed pointless before now began to make sense. Marcus started sharing stories during the training sessions. Not lectures or formal instruction, just stories from his own past that illustrated the points he was making. He told them about growing up in Detroit in the late 21st century, when the city was still recovering from decades of economic collapse. The neighborhood gym where he had learned to box had been a converted warehouse with a leaking roof and equipment held together with duct tape and hope. "My first trainer was a man named Curtis," Marcus said one afternoon while the group worked on footwork drills. He was 60 years old and had been a professional fighter back in the day. Never won a championship, never became famous, but he knew boxing like other people know breathing. He told me something on my first day that I never forgot. The trainees paused their drill to listen. Marcus had a way of making his stories feel important, even when he was just talking about the past. Curtis said that boxing is not about hitting the other person. It is about not being there when they try to hit you. That sounds simple, but most people never understand it. They think fighting is about strength or speed or toughness. Those things help, but they are not the foundation. The foundation is understanding space and time. If you know where your opponent will be and when they will be there, you can control everything that happens after that. He demonstrated, calling Kate forward to throw punches at him. She struck at him several times, each blow coming close but never quite landing. Marcus moved minimally, his head shifting just enough to let the fist slide past. To the watching humans, it looked almost casual, but they were starting to understand that nothing Marcus did was casual. Every movement had a purpose. "This is what Thorak did not understand when we sparred," Marcus continued. "He is faster than me, stronger than me, better equipped than me in every physical way, but I have been studying human fighting for 50 years. I know how bodies move. I know that a punch telegraphs itself in 100 tiny ways before it is thrown. The shift in weight, the tensing of muscles, the focusing of eyes. If you learn to read those signs, speed does not matter as much as you think." Jake raised his hand. "But, Commander, reading signs is one thing when you are fighting another human. How does that work against aliens? They move differently." "Good question," Marcus said. "The truth is, it does not work quite the same way. But the principle remains valid. Every physical action requires preparation. Every attack has a wind-up, no matter how small. Different species have different tells, but they all have tells. You just have to watch long enough to learn them." He gestured to the holographic training areas where the aliens practiced. "That is why I watch them every day. Not to admire their technique, but to learn their patterns. Thorak, for example. always shifts his weight to his back foot before striking with power. The Vex have to align their body segments before changing direction quickly. The Zenthari blink twice rapidly when they are about to attack. These are small things, but small things matter. Over the following weeks, Marcus's teaching evolved from pure boxing technique into something broader. He taught the humans to observe, to analyze, to find patterns in chaos. He showed them that fighting was not just physical, but mental, and that the mental game could overcome physical disadvantages if played correctly. He also taught them about pain, and this was perhaps his most important lesson. During one session, he had each trainee stand still while another student threw light body shots at them. Not hard enough to cause real damage, but hard enough to hurt. The point was to learn to function while being hit, to keep thinking clearly when every instinct screamed at them to cover up and retreat. "You will get hit," Marcus said, watching his students work through the exercise. "That is not failure. That is just reality. The question is what happens next. Do you panic and forget everything? Do you freeze up? Or do you stay present, stay focused, and wait for your chance to hit back?" He walked among them, correcting their posture, reminding them to breathe. In the old days, fighters called this heart. Not the organ, but the quality. The ability to take punishment and keep going. Technology cannot teach you heart. Simulations cannot build it. You only get it by actually being hurt and refusing to quit. Kate found herself thinking about this concept long after the training session ended. Heart. It seemed like such an old-fashioned idea, something from an earlier age when people fought with their fists and won or lost based on pure determination. But as she watched her fellow humans change over the weeks, she began to understand what Marcus meant. They were learning not just techniques but an attitude, a way of approaching conflict that was fundamentally different from what the Academy had taught them. The Academy had emphasized superiority through technology and tactics. Marcus emphasized survival through wisdom and will. One evening, Kate stayed after the formal session ended. Marcus was cleaning up the area, carefully wrapping and storing his equipment. She helped him in silence for a while before speaking. "Commander, can I ask you something personal?" "You can ask," Marcus said, not committing to answer. "Why boxing? I mean, you have been in the military for 40 years. You have trained in every modern combat system. Why go back to something from centuries ago?" Marcus finished coiling a length of rope before responding. "Because boxing is honest," he said finally. "Modern combat training is about overwhelming the enemy with superior force. Better weapons, better armor, better technology. That works fine when you have those advantages. But what happens when you do not? What happens when you are outgunned, outmanned, and outmatched? That is when the old ways matter." He sat down on one of the equipment crates, and for the first time Kate saw him looking tired. He was 72 years old, and despite his skill, the years showed in moments like this. "I grew up with nothing," Marcus continued. "Broken home, bad neighborhood, no opportunities. Boxing saved my life because it taught me that I could succeed even when everything was stacked against me, not by being better than everyone else, but by being smarter, by being tougher mentally, by refusing to quit when any reasonable person would have given up." He looked at Kate directly. "That is what humanity is facing now. We are in a galaxy full of species that are better than us in almost every measurable way. We can try to compete on their terms and fail, or we can find our own way to fight. Boxing is not the answer by itself, but the mindset behind it is. The willingness to be the underdog. The ability to take hits and keep coming. The patience to wait for the one moment when the stronger opponent makes a mistake. That is how humans have always survived, and that is how we will survive out here among the stars." Kate sat with those words for a long time. Around them, the training facility hummed with activity. Aliens pursuing their own paths to excellence. But here in this corner, something different was growing. Something the galaxy had not expected and did not yet understand. The next day, Kate brought 3 more human trainees to Marcus's session. The day after that, Jake brought 4. By the end of the month, Marcus's boxing corner had grown from a handful of curious students to nearly every human at the facility. They packed into the small space, working in shifts when necessary, all of them hungry for what Marcus was teaching. The aliens noticed, of course. They saw the humans gathering in their corner, heard the repetitive sounds of fists hitting bags, watched the strange footwork drills and defensive movements, but they did not understand it. To them, it looked like the humans were clinging to primitive techniques because they could not compete with modern methods. It confirmed what they already believed about humanity's place in the galactic hierarchy. Only Vrex seemed troubled by what he saw. The combat master watched from a distance, his scarred face unreadable. He had been training warriors for 200 years, and his instincts told him that something was changing. The humans moved differently now. They carried themselves with a quiet confidence that had not been there before. 6 months into the training cycle, the morning assembly began like any other. Warriors from across the galaxy filed into the central hall, taking their positions among their species groups. The routine had become familiar to everyone. Vrex would provide updates on training schedules, announce competition results, and occasionally deliver lectures on military doctrine or combat theory. Today, however, the atmosphere felt different. There was an energy in the hall that had not been present before, a sense of anticipation. Marcus stood with the other humans near the back of the hall. The group had changed significantly since that first assembly. They stood straighter now, more confident in their bearing. They had learned to accept their losses in the daily competitions without letting those losses define them. More importantly, they had learned to keep fighting even when winning seemed impossible. Vrex ascended to the platform, and the hall fell silent. The combat master's yellow eyes swept across the assembled warriors before he spoke. "Today I announce the Galactic Combat Championship," he said, his voice carrying easily through the massive space. "For those of you new to this facility, the championship is an annual tournament where each species sends a representative to compete in various combat disciplines. The event is broadcast throughout council space and serves as a demonstration of military readiness." A murmur of excitement rippled through the hall. The aliens had been anticipating this announcement. For many of them, the tournament was the entire reason they had come to the facility. It was a chance to prove themselves, to bring honor to their species, to show the galaxy what they could do. Vrex continued, outlining the tournament structure. There would be multiple divisions: armed combat, strategic warfare simulations, team tactics, and hand-to-hand fighting. Each division would have its own brackets and elimination rounds, culminating in championship matches that would take place in front of representatives from every council world. The hand-to-hand division is perhaps the most prestigious, Vrex explained. It requires no technology, no weapons, just pure combat skill. The tournament has been dominated by Crithian warriors for the past 15 years, with our champion Thorak winning the last 5 consecutive tournaments. At the mention of his name, Thorak stepped forward slightly, acknowledging the recognition. The Crithian had grown even more formidable over the past months of training. His reputation at the facility was unmatched, and everyone expected him to win his 6th title easily. Each species must submit their champion for each division by the end of this week, Vrex said. The tournament will begin in 1 month. I expect all participants to represent their species with honor and skill. The assembly ended, and the warriors dispersed to discuss who would represent them. Among the Crithians, the choice was obvious. Thorak would fight in the hand-to-hand division, and no one questioned this decision. The Vex quickly selected their fastest warrior. The Xanthari chose their best strategist. Species after species made their selections, and in every case the choice was clear. The humans gathered in their usual corner, surrounded by boxing equipment that had become familiar over the months. The discussion was more complicated for them. Earth had never advanced past the preliminary rounds in any division, and the hand-to-hand tournament had always been their worst showing. The human representatives usually lasted less than a minute before being eliminated. "It should be Jake," one of the younger officers said. "He has been training the longest with Commander Webb." Jake shook his head. "I appreciate that, but I am not ready to face someone like Thorak. None of us are. We have improved, sure, but we are still talking about fighting beings who can tear through steel." "Then maybe we should not enter the hand-to-hand division at all," another suggested. "Focus our efforts on the divisions where we have a better chance." The discussion continued, growing more heated as different people argued for different approaches. Kate listened to it all, feeling increasingly frustrated. They were acting like the humans they had been 6 months ago, defeated before they even tried. Everything Marcus had taught them seemed to be forgotten in the face of this challenge. Then a quiet voice cut through the argument. "I will represent Earth." Everyone turned to see Marcus standing at the edge of the group. He had been working the speed bag while the discussion happened, and they had almost forgotten he was there. Now he stood before them, his old workout clothes soaked with sweat, his gray hair damp against his scalp, looking every one of his 72 years. The silence that followed was heavy with shock and disbelief. Several people started to speak at once, but Marcus raised a hand and they fell quiet again. "I am the boxing instructor," he said simply. "I have been teaching you that fighting is not about physical advantages. It is about wisdom, patience, and heart. If I do not prove that myself, then everything I have taught you is just words." "Commander," Kate said carefully, "we all respect what you have done for us. You have made us better fighters and better soldiers. But this is different. You would be facing Thorak in a real match. No rules, no restrictions. He could kill you." "He could," Marcus agreed. "He probably should, based on every physical measurement. That is exactly why I need to be the one who fights him." Jake stepped forward. "Sir, I understand what you are trying to do, but there has to be another way. Let me fight. I am younger, stronger. If I lose, at least it will not be as embarrassing as sending someone your age into the ring." Marcus looked at Jake for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice was gentle but firm. "Lieutenant Morrison, do you remember what I told you about heart? About fighting when everything says you should quit? This is that moment, not for you but for me. I am not asking your permission. I am telling you that I will represent Earth, and I will do it using the skills I have spent a lifetime perfecting." Before anyone could respond, a new voice entered the conversation. How touching. Vrex had approached without them noticing, his heavy footsteps normally so loud but somehow silent when he chose. The combat master stood at the edge of their training area, looking down at Marcus with an expression that might have been amusement or contempt or both. "So the old human wants to fight in the tournament," Vrex said. "How very brave. And very foolish." He stepped closer, towering over Marcus by more than a foot. "Commander Webb, I have watched you teach your primitive boxing for months now. I have seen your students improve marginally. But surely even you understand that marginal improvement is meaningless against a warrior like Thorak. You will not last 30 seconds in the ring with him." "Perhaps," Marcus said calmly, "or perhaps not. Either way, I will be there to find out." Vrex's eyes narrowed. "You realize that this tournament is broadcast throughout Council space. Millions will watch. When you are defeated, and you will be defeated, it will be seen as confirmation of everything the galaxy believes about humanity. That you are weak, that you are primitive, that you do not belong among the advanced species. Maybe," Marcus said, "or maybe they will see something different." "And what would that be?" Marcus met Vrex's gaze steadily. "That humans do not quit. That we fight even when the odds are impossible. That underestimating us is a mistake." For a moment, something like respect flickered across Vrex's scarred face. Then it was gone, replaced by certainty. "Very well," he said. "I will accept your entry into the tournament. In fact, I will personally arrange your bracket to ensure that if you somehow survive the preliminary rounds, you will face Thorak in the championship match. The galaxy should see exactly what happens when human arrogance meets Crithian superiority." Vrex turned and walked away, leaving the humans standing in shocked silence. When he was gone, they all turned to Marcus, their expressions a mixture of concern, admiration, and fear. "Commander," Kate said quietly, "what have you done?" Marcus returned to the speed bag, his fists beginning their familiar rhythm. "What I always do, Captain. I have created an opportunity. Whether we take advantage of it depends on what happens in the next month." "An opportunity to get killed," someone muttered. "An opportunity to show the galaxy who we are," Marcus corrected. "Win or lose, they will remember this fight, and sometimes being remembered is more important than winning." Over the next days, word of Marcus's entry spread throughout the facility. The reactions ranged from mockery to concern to outright disbelief. The aliens saw it as confirmation of human foolishness. How could a species send a 72-year-old man to fight in the most demanding combat tournament in the galaxy? It was either a joke or an insult, and either way it would end badly. The humans were divided. Some supported Marcus, believing in what he had taught them even if they did not fully understand it. Others thought he was making a mistake that would embarrass Earth in front of billions of viewers. A few even suggested appealing to higher authorities to prevent him from competing, though none actually followed through on this suggestion. Through it all, Marcus continued his training routine without change. He worked the bags, practiced his footwork, sparred lightly with students who were willing. He did not increase his intensity or alter his approach. To an outside observer, he looked like a man preparing for a casual workout rather than a fight that could end his life. But those who trained closely with Marcus noticed subtle differences. His movements The tournament arena was a marvel of engineering, a massive circular space that could shift its configuration to accommodate different combat styles and environments. For the hand-to-hand division, it had been configured simply. A raised platform surrounded by energy barriers that would prevent fighters from falling, but allow spectators perfect visibility from every angle. Seating rose in tiers around the platform and every seat was filled. Delegates from hundreds of worlds had come to watch, and billions more would view the broadcast throughout council space. Marcus entered the preparation area beneath the main arena, where fighters waited for their matches. The room was large and divided into sections by species, though most of the divisions were empty now. Only the hand-to-hand competitors remained, and the atmosphere was electric with tension and anticipation. Creathians checked their scales and flexed their claws. Vex warriors performed rapid movement drills. Xanthari fighters meditated in perfect stillness, and in a corner by himself, an elderly human man wrapped his hands in old cloth strips and waited. Jake and Kate found him there, along with a dozen other human trainees who had come to offer support. They looked worried, and Marcus could not blame them. On paper, what he was about to do was suicide. The first match would be difficult enough. Surviving to face Thorax seemed impossible. "Commander," Kate said, her voice tight with concern, "it is not too late to withdraw. No one would blame you. There is no shame in recognizing when a fight cannot be won." Marcus finished wrapping his hands and flexed his fingers, testing the tightness. "Captain Barnes," he said quietly, "do you remember the first lesson I taught you? About not being where the punch lands?" "Yes, sir." "Then you know I have no intention of being where Thorax punches land either, or anyone else's." He stood and rolled his shoulders, loosening the muscles. "I am not here to prove I can take punishment, though I can. I am here to prove that intelligence and patience can overcome raw power. Watch carefully and you will understand." Before anyone could respond, an announcement echoed through the preparation area. The first match was about to begin and Marcus Webb was called to the ring. The walk from the preparation area to the platform felt longer than it was. Marcus moved through corridors lined with alien spectators, their various forms of laughter and mockery following him. He heard the whispers, felt the weight of their disbelief. An old human thought he could fight here. The absurdity of it amused them greatly. Marcus climbed the steps to the platform and stood in his corner. Across from him waited his first opponent, a warrior from a species called the Dravix. They were humanoid in basic structure but built for combat in ways humans were not. The Dravix fighter stood 6.5 feet tall, with arms that seemed slightly too long and hands that ended in hardened bone ridges instead of soft fingers. Their skin had a gray, stone-like quality that served as natural armor. The referee, a neutral Xanthari official, outlined the rules. No weapons. No intentional killing, though accidental death would not result in penalties. Fight until one combatant yielded or could no longer continue. The energy barriers would prevent anyone from leaving the platform until the match was decided. The bell sounded, and the match began. The Dravix moved forward immediately, confident in his physical advantages. He was younger, stronger, better armored by his natural physiology. The fight should have been over in seconds. He threw a heavy overhand strike that would have shattered Marcus's skull if it landed. Marcus was not there when it landed. He had shifted to the side at the last possible moment, letting the bone-ridged fist pass by his head close enough to ruffle his gray hair. The Dravix grunted in surprise and struck again, this time with a combination of blows. Marcus avoided them all, his movements minimal and precise. He did not try to block or counter. He simply was not where the strikes were aimed. The crowd, which had been laughing moments before, fell silent. Something was wrong. The old human should have been hit by now. The Dravix should have landed at least one solid blow. But Marcus moved like water, flowing around the attacks rather than meeting them head-on. The Dravix grew frustrated. He increased his attack speed, throwing combinations that should have been impossible to avoid. But Marcus avoided them anyway, his experience allowing him to read the tells that preceded each strike. The shift in weight, the tensing of muscles, the focus of eyes. Every attack announced itself just before it happened, and Marcus used those microseconds to position himself somewhere else. For 2 minutes, the Dravix attacked relentlessly, while Marcus simply evaded. The alien warrior began breathing hard, his movements becoming slightly less precise as fatigue set in. Marcus, meanwhile, showed no signs of exhaustion. He was not expending energy on attacks or blocks. He was simply moving, and moving efficiently costs far less than striking powerfully. Then Marcus saw what he had been waiting for. The Draviks overcommitted on a low strike, putting too much weight forward in an attempt to finally catch the elusive human. His guard dropped for just a fraction of a second, exposing a vulnerable point where his neck met his shoulder. Marcus struck once, a short, sharp punch delivered with perfect timing and placement. The blow was not heavy by the standards of the Draviks' natural armor, but it did not need to be. It targeted a nerve cluster that existed in most humanoid species, and the effect was immediate. The Draviks' left arm went numb, hanging uselessly at his side. The warrior staggered back in shock, trying to process what had just happened. Marcus did not press the advantage. He simply returned to his defensive stance and waited. The Draviks tried to continue fighting one-handed, but the loss of his dominant arm had destroyed his balance and coordination. After another minute of ineffective attacks, he yielded, acknowledging defeat with a gesture of respect that surprised many in the crowd. Marcus bowed slightly in return and left the platform. The preparation area erupted in conversation when he returned. The human trainees surrounded him, talking excitedly about what they had just witnessed. Marcus waved away their praise and sat down to rest. The next match was not for another hour, and he needed to conserve his energy. But the aliens were talking now, too. In the various species sections of the preparation area, warriors who had dismissed Marcus as a joke were reconsidering. What they had just seen was not luck. The human had fought with clear purpose and strategy. He had known exactly what he was doing. Vrex watched from the control room overlooking the arena, his expression unreadable. Beside him stood Thorak, who had come to observe the competition. The Crithian champion watched the replay of Marcus's fight on multiple screens, analyzing every movement. "Interesting technique," Thorak said. "He uses minimal energy for defense and waits for a specific vulnerable moment to attack. Very efficient against a single opponent who relies on power, but useless against a warrior who does not make mistakes," Vrex added. "Against you, such tactics would fail. You do not overcommit. You do not leave openings." Thorak nodded slowly, but his eyes remained on the screens. "Perhaps," he said, "but I would not want to fight him immediately after a long day. Fatigue creates mistakes even in the best fighters." Marcus's second match came an hour later, and this time the crowd watched with genuine interest rather than mockery. His opponent was a Vex warrior, faster and more agile than the Draviks, but lacking the same physical power. The Vex relied on speed, striking from multiple angles in rapid succession, creating a storm of attacks that should have been overwhelming. But Marcus had spent months watching the Vex train. He knew their patterns, understood their movement capabilities. He knew that despite their speed, they could not change direction instantly. Every strike committed them to a specific path, and that path could be predicted. The Vex attacked like a whirlwind, mandibles clicking rapidly as it struck from high, low and middle angles in dizzying combination. Marcus defended differently than in the first match, using a technique he had taught his students called slipping and rolling. Instead of stepping away from each strike, he moved his head and torso just enough to let the blows pass by. It looked almost like he was dancing, swaying to music only he could hear. The Vex's speed was impressive but ultimately predictable. After 90 seconds of continuous attack, patterns began emerging. The warrior favored certain combinations, preferred certain angles, and most importantly, had to pause for a fraction of a second every 8 to 10 strikes to realign its body segments. Marcus waited for that pause. When it came, he stepped inside the Vex's guard and delivered 2 quick body shots to the warrior's thorax, targeting the seams between armored segments. The shots were precise rather than powerful, but they disrupted the Vex's coordination. The insectoid warrior stumbled, unable to maintain its rapid movement pattern. Marcus stepped back and waited. The Vex tried to resume its attack, but the timing was gone, the rhythm broken. After a few more unsuccessful combinations, it yielded, recognizing that Marcus had found a flaw in its technique that could not be overcome in a single match. The crowd was no longer silent. Conversations rippled through the arena as beings from across the galaxy tried to understand what they were watching. The old human was winning, not through power or speed or technology, but through something they had not expected: intelligence, experience. The day of the championship match arrived with a weight of anticipation unlike anything the facility had experienced. The arena was packed beyond capacity, with standing room filled and overflow crowds watching on screens in every corridor and common area. Representatives from the Galactic Council occupied special seating, present to witness what would either be a historic upset or a brutal confirmation of established power structures. Marcus spent the morning in his quarters, going through his usual routine. Light stretching, meditation, a simple breakfast that would provide energy without weighing him down. He did not watch analysis programs or read commentary about the upcoming fight. None of that mattered. He knew Thorak's capabilities, had watched the Crithian fight dozens of times over the past months. All the information was already stored in his mind, waiting to be accessed when needed. Jake and Kate came to walk with him to the preparation area. They said little, sensing that Marcus was already focused inward, preparing mentally for what was coming. When they reached the corridor outside his quarters, they found nearly every human at the facility waiting there. The trainees who had learned from Marcus over the months now stood in silent support, their presence saying what words could not. Marcus stopped and looked at them, really looked at each face. These young men and women who had come to the facility believing they were inferior, who had been beaten down by loss after loss until they forgot what it meant to believe in themselves. He had taught them boxing, but more importantly, he had taught them that being human was not a weakness, that their minds and hearts could overcome physical limitations. That losing a battle did not mean losing the war. Whatever happens today, Marcus said, his voice carrying to everyone present, remember what you have learned. Remember that strength comes in many forms. Remember that the greatest warriors are not those who never lose, but those who refuse to stay down. He paused, then added with a slight smile, and remember that an old man from Detroit just made it to the championship by doing what they said could not be done. The humans erupted in cheers, their voices echoing through the corridor. Marcus nodded once, then turned and walked toward the preparation area, Jake and Kate at his sides. The preparation area beneath the arena buzzed with activity. Warriors from eliminated matches had returned to watch the final bout, and media representatives from across council space jockeyed for position. Everyone wanted to capture the moment when humanity's unlikely champion faced the galaxy's greatest fighter. Marcus found his assigned corner and began his preparation ritual. Hand wraps, stretches, the mental checklist he had developed over decades of fighting. He was aware of the cameras focusing on him, the commentators discussing his chances, but he tuned it all out. There was only the fight now, only the moment that was coming. Across the preparation area, Thorak underwent his own preparations. The Crithian champion was surrounded by trainers and supporters, his scaled body gleaming under the lights. At 7 feet tall and 300 pounds of pure muscle and natural weapons, he looked like what he was, a perfect combat organism. Vrex stood with him, speaking in low tones, probably offering final strategic advice. The call came, and both fighters made their way to the arena. The crowd's roar was deafening, a wall of sound that hit like a physical force. The arena's lighting system had been configured for maximum drama, spotlights following each fighter as they approached the platform. Marcus climbed the steps slowly, his movements economical and controlled. Thorak ascended from the opposite side, his presence dominating the space. They stood in their respective corners while the referee made the introductions. The crowd fell silent to hear the formal announcement, and the words echoed through the massive space. Commander Marcus Webb of Earth, 72 years old, 3 victories in the tournament, champion Thorak of the Crithian Empire, current holder of 5 consecutive championships, undefeated in formal combat for 7 years. Brex himself provided commentary for the broadcast, his voice reaching billions of viewers across council space. He detailed Thorak's advantages: reach, strength, natural weapons, speed, endurance. The Crithian had evolved from apex predators, he explained. Their species had conquered their homeworld through sheer combat superiority. Thorak represented the pinnacle of that evolution, a warrior without equal. Then Vrex turned his attention to Marcus, and his tone changed subtly. The human was older, weaker, slower. He lacked natural weapons or armor. By every physical metric, he should not be here. His presence in the championship was an anomaly, perhaps interesting from an analytical standpoint, but ultimately meaningless. The match would demonstrate once again the natural hierarchy of strength in the galaxy. Marcus heard none of this. His focus was absolute, his mind clear and calm. He had fought his whole life. This was just another fight, just another opponent. Bigger and stronger than most, certainly, but the principles remained the same. Read the opponent. Manage energy. Wait for the moment. The referee called them to the center of the platform. Marcus and Thorax stood face to face, the size difference stark and undeniable. The Crithian's yellow eyes looked down at the elderly human with something that might have been respect or might have been pity. "You fought well to reach this point," Thorax said, his voice a deep rumble. "That deserves acknowledgement. But this ends now. I cannot hold back in a championship match." "I would not want you to," Marcus replied calmly. "Fight with everything you have." "I will do the same." They returned to their corners. The referee raised his hand, holding the moment. The arena held its breath. Billions watched and waited. The hand dropped. The bell sounded. The final match began. Thorax did not rush forward as his first-round opponents might have done. He moved deliberately, circling to his left, studying Marcus with the eyes of an experienced fighter. He had watched the human's previous matches. He knew about the defensive technique, the patient waiting, the exploitation of overcommitment. He would not make those mistakes. Marcus mirrored the circling, his hands raised in the familiar boxing stance. He watched Thorax's feet, his center of mass, the positioning of his hands, looking for tells, for patterns, for anything that would give him advance warning of an attack. Thorax struck suddenly, a lightning-fast jab that covered the distance between them in a blur. Marcus slipped it by millimeters, feeling the air displacement as the clawed hand passed his face. The Crithian followed immediately with a left hook, then a right cross. Combining attacks faster than most beings his size should have been able to manage. Marcus defended purely, slipping and rolling as he had against the Vex, but adjusted for Thorax's different attack patterns. Each strike came closer than the previous matches because Thorax's skill was leagues beyond the earlier opponents. The Crithian was not just powerful. He was technically excellent, his movements refined by centuries of martial tradition and years of personal experience. The first minute passed with Thorax attacking and Marcus defending. The crowd watched in stunned silence. They had expected the human to fall within seconds. Instead, he was still standing, still moving, still avoiding the devastating strikes that should have ended the fight instantly. Thorax adjusted his strategy, using feints and combination attacks designed to force Marcus into making a defensive error. He would strike high, then go low, or telegraph an attack to one side before switching to the other. But Marcus had seen every variation of these tactics before. In gyms across Earth, fighters had been developing and countering such techniques for centuries. He read each feint, recognized each setup, and responded with the minimum movement necessary. 2 minutes passed. Then 3. Thorax was landing nothing solid, just glancing blows that scraped across Marcus's arms and shoulders without causing significant damage. The Crithian's breathing grew slightly heavier, not from exhaustion but from the mental strain of fighting an opponent who refused to make mistakes. Marcus, meanwhile, was learning. Every exchange taught him more about Thorax's rhythms, preferences, and limitations. The Crithian was magnificent, perhaps the best pure fighter Marcus had ever faced, but he was not perfect. No one was perfect. Everyone had tells, everyone had patterns, everyone eventually made the mistake that opened them up. 4 minutes. The crowd's silence broke into murmuring. This should not be happening. The champion should have won by now. Why was the old human still standing? How was he avoiding strikes that no one else had ever avoided? Thorax's frustration began to show in subtle ways. His movements became fractionally less controlled. His breathing changed rhythm. He was thinking now instead of just fighting, and thinking slowed everything down by microseconds that became critical in combat at this level. 5 minutes in, Thorax made a decision. He had been fighting carefully, respecting Marcus's demonstrated abilities, but this had gone on long enough. It was time to end it with overwhelming force. He changed his stance slightly, shifting weight to his back foot in preparation for his signature attack. A double strike combination that had finished every championship match he had ever fought. Right hand high to occupy the opponent's defense, left hand low targeting the body, both delivered with such power and speed that blocking was impossible, and dodging required you to commit before the second strike was even thrown. Time seemed to stop in the moment after impact. The arena, filled with thousands of beings from across the galaxy, fell into a silence so complete that the hum of the facility's life support systems became audible. Every eye watched as Thorak, the undefeated Crithian champion, swayed on his feet. The 7-foot warrior's yellow eyes went unfocused. His powerful legs, which had supported him through countless battles, suddenly could not remember how to hold his weight. His arms dropped to his sides, his claws retracting automatically. For one impossible moment he stood frozen like a statue, his brain trying to process what had just happened. Then gravity reasserted itself, and Thorak fell. He went down like a tree being felled, his massive body crashing to the platform with an impact that shook the energy barriers. He lay motionless on his back, his chest rising and falling with breath, but his eyes closed, unconscious. Marcus stood over him, his right fist still clenched from the punch, his chest heaving with exertion. For several seconds no one moved. No one spoke. The galaxy watched in stunned disbelief as the referee rushed forward to check on Thorak. The Zenthari official knelt beside the fallen champion, checking vital signs, assessing consciousness. The examination took only moments, but those moments stretched into eternity for everyone watching. Finally, the referee stood and made the official gesture. Thorak was unable to continue. The referee raised Marcus's hand, declaring him the victor. The arena exploded. The sound that erupted from the crowd defied description. It was shock and awe and disbelief and excitement all compressed into one massive wave of noise. Beings from species that had never shown emotion in public were on their feet screaming. Warriors who had dismissed humanity as weak now shouted themselves hoarse, celebrating what they had just witnessed. The human section of the crowd had gone absolutely wild. Jake and Kate were embracing, tears streaming down their faces. The other human trainees were jumping and shouting, their voices lost in the greater roar but their joy unmistakable. They had watched an old man from their own species do what everyone said was impossible. On the platform, Marcus lowered his hand and looked down at Thorak. The Crithian's eyes were beginning to flutter open, consciousness returning slowly. Marcus knelt beside him, and when Thorak's yellow eyes finally focused on the human's face, Marcus extended his hand. "Good fight," Marcus said simply. Thorak stared at the offered hand for a moment, his expression unreadable. Then slowly he reached up and grasped it. Marcus helped pull the massive warrior into a sitting position, and Thorak sat there on the platform, one hand rubbing his jaw, trying to understand what had happened. "How?" Thorak said, his voice hoarse. "I have fought for decades. No one has ever done that to me. How did an old human land that strike?" Marcus sat back on his heels. "Because you thought the fight was over. You committed everything to those 2 strikes, so certain they would end the match that you did not prepare for what came after. That moment of absolute commitment is the moment of greatest vulnerability. Every fighter learns this eventually. Some learn it in training. Others learn it the hard way." Thorak absorbed this, his warrior's mind already analyzing the truth of it. "You were waiting for that specific attack the entire fight. Not just that fight. I have been waiting 6 months. Since the first time I saw you demonstrate that combination, I knew that if I could survive long enough to see it, and if I could read the timing perfectly, I would have one chance. One moment where your technique created the opening I needed, and if you had been wrong about the timing, then I would have lost," Marcus said honestly. "But I was not wrong. 50 years of experience taught me to read those tells. Thorak, you are an incredible fighter, perhaps the best I have ever faced. But you have never fought someone who made a career out of beating opponents who were bigger, stronger, and faster than them. That is what humans do. That is what we have always done." Medical personnel arrived to check on both fighters. Thorak waved them away, insisting he was fine aside from a bruised ego and a jaw that would hurt for a few days. Marcus accepted a towel and water but declined further medical attention. The referee attempted to raise his hand again for the cameras, but Marcus gently pulled away and walked to the edge of the platform. Below, the human trainees had pushed their way to the front of the crowd. They reached up toward him, their faces shining with pride and joy and something else. Hope. Marcus had given them hope. Vrex appeared on the platform, climbing the steps with heavy, deliberate movements. The combat master's scarred face was impossible to read as he approached Marcus. The crowd fell quiet again, waiting to see how the Crithian would react to his champion's defeat. Vrex stopped in front of Marcus and studied him for a long moment. Then, to the surprise of everyone watching, he bowed. Not a deep bow, but a clear gesture of respect. "Commander Webb," Vreck said, his voice carrying through the arena's audio system, "I owe you an apology. When you arrived at this facility, I saw an old human past his prime. I saw weakness. I saw a species that did not belong among the strong." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I was wrong. You have demonstrated something that I, in 200 years of training warriors, had forgotten. That true strength is not merely physical, that wisdom and patience and the refusal to quit can overcome advantages that seem insurmountable." He turned to address the crowd directly. "Let this match be a lesson to all species of the Council. We have spent too long measuring worth by narrow metrics: size, strength, natural weapons. But Commander Webb has shown us that the most dangerous warrior in the room might be the one we underestimate, the one who looks vulnerable but possesses knowledge we have forgotten or never learned." Vrex faced Marcus again. "What you have taught your students over these months, this boxing as you call it, it is more than a fighting style. It is a philosophy, and I would be honored if you would remain at this facility to teach it to warriors of all species." Marcus considered this for a moment, then shook his head slightly. "Combat Master Vrex, I appreciate the offer, but my job was never to stay here permanently. It was to prove that humans can compete, that we deserve our place in the galaxy. I believe I have done that. My students can continue what I started." He looked out at the assembled crowd, at beings from hundreds of worlds who had watched him fight. "But I will leave you all with this thought. Every species has its own strengths. The Krithians have power, the Vex have speed, the Zenthari have precision, and humans have something that is equally valuable, though harder to measure. We have the ability to adapt, to learn, to find solutions when none seem possible. We have spent our entire history as a species being the underdogs, fighting opponents stronger than us, surviving in environments that should have killed us. That experience has value. That wisdom matters." The crowd erupted again, though this time it was not just celebration but understanding. Across the galaxy, beings watching the broadcast began to reconsider their assumptions about humanity. If an elderly human could defeat the greatest champion through intelligence and patience, what else might humans be capable of? The award ceremony followed, and Marcus stood on the highest platform while the Galactic Council representative placed the championship medal around his neck. The weight of it felt strange but not uncomfortable. He had won before in smaller venues, but never on a stage this large. As the ceremony concluded and Marcus descended from the platform, he was surrounded by well-wishers from dozens of species. Warriors who had dismissed him now wanted to shake his hand, to learn from him, to understand how he had achieved the impossible. Media representatives shouted questions, asking for his secrets, his techniques, his training methods. Marcus answered what he could, but his focus kept returning to the group of humans waiting at the edge of the crowd, his students, the young men and women he had taught over the past months. They had learned to box, yes, but more importantly, they had learned to believe in themselves again. When Marcus finally extracted himself from the crowd and reached them, Jake stepped forward. "Commander," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "thank you. For everything, for showing us what we could be." "You already were," Marcus corrected gently. "I just reminded you. The strength was always there. You just needed to remember how to access it." Kate spoke up. "What happens now? You said your job is done, but there is so much more we could learn." Marcus looked at each of them in turn. "Now you teach others. You take what you have learned and share it, not just with humans, but with anyone willing to listen. The galaxy needs to understand that there are many paths to strength, and the old ways have value alongside the new." He pulled off his hand wrap slowly, the cloth stained with sweat and marked with the imprint of the fight. Boxing is not the answer to everything, but the lessons it teaches about patience and observation and fighting smart instead of just fighting hard, those lessons are universal. Whether you are in a ring, on a battlefield, or negotiating a treaty, the same principles apply. Read your opponent. Wait for your moment. Do not waste energy on actions that do not serve a purpose. One of the younger trainees, a woman named Claire, who had been one of the first to start attending Marcus's sessions, asked the question they were all thinking. "Will we ever see you again?"